Good. So welcome to the Parallax Strange Attractor Roundtable podcast. I'm very pleased that you all took the time for this. I hope will be a very interesting talk. My co-host is Dennis Wittrock. He's a Holacracy coach and an author and an integral pioneer. And I will give him the word, to introduce the topic and the general theme of our talk. Dennis, go ahead.
So we welcome and thank you very much, and very happy to see all of you joining this conversation. And we gave it a tentative title of Outcompeting Game A, New Organizational Models for a Game B World. So that's kind of the overarching theme, let's say. And I wanted to start with a brief thought experiment for the viewers, which goes like this. So imagine you're the founder of a company. You just founded you created a company. You got sick of your old job. You quit, and then you build your own thing, right? And so now you have a really cool business idea, and things are coming together. And at some point, you are actually successful, and the thing starts growing, and with more people coming onto the team. And at some point, it really becomes clear to you, you will need some structure there, some kind of, management, something like that. So what do you do? So how would you organize your business? Would you introduce a level of managers? Or does it even have to be the usual management hierarchy? So what would you do? And I think that's a question that many of us are struggling with. So this is the roundtable that we call a strange attractor, and the strange attractor is a kind of our shorthand for a new emerging structure. You can call it metamodern or integral or teal or post-progressive, Game B, or whichever label suits you really. And in our conversations, we explore the strange attractor from different angles, from different perspectives. In our last roundtable, we looked at it from the lens of politics. And in this one, we will look from the perspective of business and organizations. So to get a sense of what is actually currently being born. In general, I would say we can look at it from three different levels in this conversation, and we kind of have an expert for each of these levels to represent that. So you could look at it from a macro level, and that's where I imagine maybe the game A versus game B conversation plays a role, kind of the big picture. Then we have some kind of a middle level or meso level, where the level of organizational theory and management in general comes into view. And on the micro level, how do we actually embody these new principles in concrete organizations? And here I see we have a great practitioner here with Tom. So this is how it's going to go. This conversation, first we do a little check-in round. Then we introduce each one of you briefly, and then there will be a round of initial questions to each one of you, around about 10 minutes each. So everyone gets a kind of space, and after that, we're curious what will emerge from there, like what topics come to the foreground for us. And in the end, we wanted to, because it's on many people's minds and on our minds certainly too, wanted to have a look at the situation in Ukraine from that lens, maybe drawing on what we talked about. Maybe there's something that emerges from there that might make a difference or shed some additional light. After that, we wrap up in the closing round. So that's the plan from which we're going to deviate. So for sure. So Tom, would you introduce Jim for us?
Right. So Jim Rott, he's the host of the popular Jim Rott Show and the former CEO of Network Solutions. He has been affiliated with the Santa Fe Institute since 2002, serving as a chairman from 2009 through 2012. And in conversation with Jordan Hall, he coined the term Game B that now galvanizes a global movement of change makers.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jim, for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very thrilled to have you. I listened to a lot of your stuff on podcasts, on your podcast, one of my favorites. And we have Thomison. Besides being a friend, he's a seasoned entrepreneur and business builder, a recognized leader, developer, and practitioner of self-organizing systems and methods. In 2007, he co-founded HolacracyOne LLC to develop a mature Holacracy into what is now the gold standard replacement for conventional management hierarchies. In 2015, he launched encode.org to further embed self-organization practices in legal, capital, and social structures. In 2019, Encode launched PowerShift Capital to reinvent sourcing and deploying capital for purposeful, self-organized, and power-shifted endeavors. And in 2020, Encode launched PowerShift People to create a global community of interdependent agents working in purposeful, self-organized, and power-shifted systems. That's a mouthful, but it's great stuff. Yeah, welcome, Tom. And then last but not least, we have Marco Robledo joining us from, well, Palma, Spain, Palma de Mallorca. Marco is the author of the book 3D Management, an integral theory for organizations in the vanguard of evolution, and advises on how to build more conscious, humane, efficacious, and responsible forms of enterprise. He's a professor of business and director of the Master of Business Administration at the University of the Balearics. He defines himself as a change agent that helps organizations and individuals in their development towards higher consciousness. Welcome, Marco.
Thank you very much.
So let's start with a general round of initial questions, and I give the word to Tom.
Wonderful. Okay, and I will focus my first questions to Jim. We just had the conversation a couple of weeks ago where we went a little bit deeper into Game A and Game B. But for those who haven't listened to this or are not familiar with your work, would you briefly explain what you mean with Game A, maybe in relationship to the other term you coined, like Proto-Bs, and in relationship to Game A, just to we get a baseline.
Sure. First, I want to correct the record. You said that Jordan Hall and I coined the term Game B. I would say it was actually Thor Muller who was the first person who actually took what was a whiteboard picture and said, let's call the thing Game B. So Thor Muller gets the credit. With Jordan Hall as the guy who wrote it on the whiteboard, but didn't realize that's what we should call it, right? So anyway, Game A, Game B. Game A is the status quo, that thing that most of us live in every day. And in my formulation has been the dominant social operating system since about 1700. That includes, financialized capitalism, growing amounts of democracy, mass media eventually, etc. One can argue that the roots of Game A go all the way back to the invention of architecture, and there's some merit to that argument, but in my sharp thinking, I'd start with 1700 essentially. I would suggest that we're in a stage Game A now, meaning that exponential growth in a finite world can't go on forever. And finally, we are seeing that wall approaching. And it's important to realize that in 1700, Game A was a great invention, a huge increase in capacity and human well-being over feudalism, absolute monarchs, etc. And the concept that weak little humans who at that point still didn't have fossil fuels or engines or electricity or any of that stuff were in any danger of overrunning the limits of the earth or even our own cognitive limits would have been considered absurd. So Game A spun up from its beginnings in, I'd argue, England and the Netherlands, and then spread through the continent and then eventually around the world, and continue to gain speed as all the various pieces reinforced each other. Enlightenment thinking plus science plus technology plus financialized capitalism as four of the main building blocks delivered miracles in terms of increases of standard of living, increases of population of the world. Just think of all the inventions we learned in our history books, etc. And it kept chugging along till right after probably World War II was the inflection point with the invention of the atomic bomb. Finally, oh shit, humans are now capable of doing serious damage to the ecosystem and to worldwide civilization, and then continue accelerating. And then seems like another inflection point occurred in the 70s with the invention of the microprocessor, taking financial currencies off the gold standard, where finance became unconstrained by its own imagination. Mass media really started permeating absolutely every aspect of life, first with color TV, which was a fundamental upgrade from the earlier black and white, and then eventually, of course, computer networks, and then in the early double aughts, social media. And all that is led through a series of exponential curves, which, again, exponentials in a finite world and with finite human capacity can't go on forever. I think what Herb Simon said. The one thing you can say about exponential growth is it won't go on forever. That which must stop eventually will. So the question on this transit, on how it stops, is does it stop abruptly through game A driving over the cliff? Maybe a massive die-off of human population, horrible wars, who knows what? Or do we manage a transition to something else? A new civilization. And so game B, again, it's still a relatively small group of it, but we have audacious visions, is that game B should become the social operating system for humanity, for everybody eventually. And that its goal is to take advantage of what game A created, including ideas like holacracy or sociocracy or other non-hierarchical forms, or at least not purely hierarchical forms of management, networks, the idea of membranes and protocols, the things we've learned from biology, etc. Some of the ideas from cryptocurrency that listeners to my podcast know. I'm a bit of a skeptic on the current instantiations of most of the crypto policies, etc. And so the goal is to create a new world that's based first and foremost on honesty and good faith and radical intellectual honesty, and then is built on sort of four pillars, which are self-organization, network centricity, metastability, and what the hell's the fourth one? I don't remember, but it'll come to me. And this idea, these ideas are, we've done lots of thinking and lots of writing in the areas of finance, operating businesses, operating communities, early childhood education, what should replace K-12 education, how to deal with the generator function. So yeah, this is very important. Very important game B idea is at the heart of game A are some generator functions, deep principles, which have driven the engine and cause it to have this exponential capacity with no ability to put on the brakes. One of which is that everything is defined in terms of short-term money-on-money return. That is the overarching value that crushes everything else. It's quite interesting that is so central. Another one is a game theoretic problem that we call the multipolar trap. The multipolar trap is where there's a group of people who maybe would like to do the right thing, but if one person does the wrong thing, they're forced by competitive dynamics to follow along. Classic example is defense spending. Does any society actually want to do defense spending? Probably not. But if one of them chooses to and starts to ramp up spending on military, everybody else is forced to respond. And referencing the Ukraine situation, even relatively peaceful, what we thought were going to be peaceful areas like Western Europe are looking to double their defense spending, many of the countries over the next few years. So we're caught in a classic multipolar trap where one bad actor forces other people to respond.
So what would be the generator function of game B, proto-Bs, let's say? So proto-Bs, as I understand it, are the organizational structure for organizations that play a different game, right? And so which kind of generator function do they have?
Yeah, the key generator function, and it's easier to say than it is to do, which is I'm looking very forward to hearing other people's thoughts on how we do this, is to move from I win, you lose, or neutral value exchange market economics to what we call omni win-win-win, where every decision that's made is in the context of actor A and whoever they're dealing with on the other side, actor B, and the community they're embedded in, and the whole world. So if we could actually get to the point where each decision each person made in their life about everything, literally everything, was couched in the omni win-win-win way, we would have a generator function of an immense power. Right. You asked about proto-Bs, as I alluded to the fact, Game B, the term came into existence in January 2013. And a group of us, gradually growing community, I don't know, 30,000 people now, something like that, have been working on various aspects from mostly a theory perspective until recently. And we now believe we have more than enough theory. It's time to put it into practice, try it out. And proto-Bs is one of the two main vectors going forward, which is on the ground communities targeted about the Dunbar number, 150 people, which history has shown can self-manage with light bureaucracy, maybe no bureaucracy, but relatively light bureaucracy. And then think of those as membranes in the biological sense. And then we have multiple proto-Bs which interact with each other via protocols. And it's our thought that this is a way to build up a society that adheres to those pillars that we talked about previously. The second, and perhaps more relevant, I don't talk about it quite as much because we're not quite as far along in thinking about it, but we are thinking about it. We call it Game B Ventures, which are businesses which are designed to operate on Game B principles and are able to literally outcompete their Game A competitors, at least in narrow domains, enough to get some traction in the economic world. And I, our work at the Santa Fe Institute, where we have many theorists, but one of the things we do is we require them to work with experimentalists or people who have data, because theory by itself can just got to go off to the wild blue yonder. So we're now at the point where it's time for Game B to be in loops of theory, practice, theory, and sort of empirically explore the design space of a social operating system for the future. So that's Game B.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. I give it over to Dennis because I hope we will zoom into this in the general discussion. But for now, Dennis.
Yeah, so let's continue with Marco because maybe the segue was the concrete practice or the how do we do this? And Marco is also in research, so he bridges the academic world, but he's also engaged in actual on the ground work in such new organizations. So let's hear from Marco. So Marco, you wrote the book called 3D Management. So what is 3D management and how is it different from business as usual or Game A business, if you want?
Yeah. Well, 3D management is the pioneer application of integral theory in business. And the starting point of 3D management is the realization that if you study business, for example, the first thing that they will tell you in class is that the final objective of business is maximization of profits or maximization of economic value. And if you make an integral analysis of that, I mean, that's not integral at all. They give you the traditional business model or management model is one-dimensional, whereas we know from integral theory that any integral analysis has more than one dimension. There are many other dimensions that we have to take into account. And obviously, we know from the AQUAL model, for example, that an integral analysis should take into account at least 4 different aspects. That will be the psychological, then the behavioral and physical, and then the social and the cultural elements. If we reduce these 4 dimensions into what is called the big 3 dimensions of human existence, we get 3 dimensions that are the ones that are making up my model. So my model recognizes that an integral perspective of business should take into account 3 irreducible dimensions, which are the scientific dimension, the artistic dimension, and the ethical dimension. That's how I apply these big 3 dimensions to business. The scientific dimension will be the dimension of the dimension that is normally the hegemonic dimension of the game theory, let's say, is the one that is looking for maximization of value. And it does that through productivity and through quality and financial systems. And it's what I call the dimension of the present, because if you don't have this dimension right, you will have to close down your business because you are not going to be making enough money to survive. So it's a dimension of survival. And that's why it is so important. But then there are other dimensions equally important. The second dimension is the artistic dimension. The artistic dimension for me is the dimension of development, the development of the organization, the development of its products and services, and the development of its people. This artistic dimension is based on values like creativity, like innovation, like beauty, like design, anything that is making the organization ready for the future, you know, because if the previous dimension was the dimension of the present, this is the dimension, in my opinion, of the future. If you don't take care of this dimension, there will come other organizations that will outcompete you. And then there is a third dimension that is the ethical dimension, that is the moral dimension of business, a dimension that is, has as its main objective the contribution to the common good. And it has as values things like social responsibility, sustainability, honesty, transparency, and so on and so forth. And this is a dimension, I mean, my model, I place it in a triangle that is equilateral. So each dimension is equally important as the other ones, and the idea is that you have to balance them. But I place this ethical dimension at the bottom of the triangle because this is the dimension that sets the limits to the other dimensions. I mean, the ethical dimension sets the limits of what is right and what is wrong, and how far are you willing to go in terms of making more money or something like that, you know. Then those are the 3 irreducible, again, dimensions of business and of management. But we need a 4th dimension to integrate these 3 dimensions in a single unity, so there are not imbalances. And is what I call the spiritual dimension. The spiritual dimension tries to integrate all these 3 dimensions, and it does that through the creating a higher purpose of the organization, a purpose that gives meaning and transcendence to the organization and its members, and a purpose that builds a community where everybody is rowing in the same direction. So that would be my model, and obviously, you know, this model, being an integral model, it can be applied to any kind of organizations. But then I have certain requisites that I think are desirable for this kind of organizations, that we can talk about that later, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of application, you have applied these principles in a project on the ground, so to speak, in Mallorca, in the in the cinema, I believe.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that. This was very interesting to read about.
Well, yes,
So,
that's probably the place where I've developed my theory in a bigger way, because then I've provided consultancy for some other organization, but then my involvement it hasn't been as big. But in this case, it was a cinema. It's a very beautiful story, because it was a chain of cinemas that was about to disappear, because it belonged to a Spanish chain of cinema that was distributed all over Spain. And in the previous crisis, in the 2008, especially, there was a big crisis in the film industry worldwide, and in particular in Spain. There were a lot of things that were going on in terms of the digital world was coming to cinema, so you had to substitute all the equipment for digital equipment. Then, in particular in Spain, there was an increase in taxes, huge increase in taxes for culture, and as a result of that, there were a lot of cinemas disappearing in Spain. And this particular cinema, the one we had in Spain belonging to this chain, was about to disappear. And one of the particularity of this chain of cinemas is that it was a cinema that was playing all the movies in original version. That is something very uncommon in Spain. Here in Spain, we dub all the movies. So if you are a really cinephile, you cannot hear to the movies in their original version if you go to the theater. And secondly, the other aspect is that they are playing movies that are more kind of independent movies, art house kind of cinema. It is an art house kind of cinema. And something very beautiful happened. That is that there was a social movement when people heard about that, which is something very uncommon from in Mallorca, as maybe Tom knows, as he's living in Mallorca now, that we Mallorcans are very conformist kind of people, you know. So if something that we don't like happens, we say, okay, what can we do about it? So we are the conformist type in that respect. And in here, it happened a sort of miracle that people got together to rescue this cinema. And as a result of that, a lot of people started giving them money for the cinema, and they created an association to rescue the cinema. So then this chain of cinemas sold the cinema to this group, this association that was created. So the cinema was rescued. And we decided to apply the principles of democracy, and it was the moment of Occupy Wall Street and so on. So there was this type in the atmosphere. So it was a cinema, and it is a cinema still, operated by its members. And nowadays it's a totally self-managed cinema based on these principles. And we've been able to survive for all these years, and this is one of the virtues of this system, you know, because the level of involvement and commitment and engagement of the people that are in this linked to the cinema in a way or another is extraordinary. I mean, I hear like members of this cinema, so they are maybe only spectators that they go there. And they pay the yearly fee, and they go to the movies, and they don't have any further involvement. But maybe they tell me, I never go to another theater in Mallorca apart from this one. I always wait. If they play a movie that I like in another theater, I just wait to see it in a platform, you know, in HBO or in Netflix or wherever. But I never go to another other cinema, because that would be like betraying my cinema. This is my cinema, and I don't want to betray it. And the same happens with the employees. The level of involvement and commitment, and then again, there is a lot of people that are volunteering and working for the cinema, and spending a lot of hours working there. So that's one of the beauties of these alternative systems, you know.
So it's there's an element of community and a purpose, especially people feel connected and take over responsibility and collaborate in a different way, I assume. That's really inspiring example. And the topic of purpose, to find a segue to Tom, is also very much at the forefront of his mind. And but before I ask you about purpose, in your view, what constitutes an organization? So when, like, because we often talk about organizations, and when do we have one in the first place? Can you give us a definition or something like that from your view, Tom?
Oh, yes. So I redefine a lot of things in my work, for sure, including the definition of what an organization is. I kind of come from an entrepreneurial background. I've had the pleasure of answering your original question, Dennis, of how do we structure things when we come together as people, as partners with a cool idea? How do we get that cool idea into the world? As an entrepreneur, that's kind of it, right? And so I've been doing this for a really long time, including changing the way we answer that question with Holacracy for the last 15 years. And so I, like everybody else, for the longest time, I thought an organization was just a collection of cool people all hanging out together to do really interesting things, right? It's this collection of people, of like-minded people coming together to do really cool work in the world. And all the other stuff was just kind of getting in the way of that. And we still kind of think in our conventional organizations, I would say Game B organizations, as organizations as a collection of people. And it seems like the game is to optimize or make more efficient the people in the system to somehow, for commercial gain. It sounds obscene to me now today. And so I no longer define an organization as a collection of people. And I think this is one of the key distinctions that Holacracy brought to the table, among other things, is this separation of the notion that an organization is something in its own right. It is something that hangs on a new attractor, a new generator, purpose. And everything that organization does is geared to expressing purpose into the world. And we separate the individuals from the organization. So the individuals come together to serve a purpose greater than themselves as a collection of people with their own way of coming about organizing themselves and relating to themselves, but separate from the organizational structure itself. And we can get away with that separation because Holacracy institutionalizes and systematizes a set of rules that coordinates our activity. So we no longer have to rely on relational management structures or engagement structures or development structures. We have a rule set, an algorithm, if you will, to use modern day DAO terms. We have a way of coordinating effort to get work done in pursuit of purpose. And we all play by the same set of rules. This is amazing to me. This is a radically different way. I say radically different. HolacracyOne's 15 years old. So this has been around for a bit. And self-organization before that, as everybody on the call well knows, is decades old, back with Simcoe and Sociocracy and Gore and all of the others, Morningstar, the early pioneers. So there's been this intuition that the way we have structured things, as Jim said in Game B, is just reaching its limits. And that was my own experience as an entrepreneur. Before launching HolacracyOne, I was an entrepreneur trying to fix things and make things better with all the incremental improvements, leadership development, total quality management, business process improvement, lean and agile systems, all of the stuff. And I had the opportunity to have that done to me by some of the big leading management consultancies. And then I was part of the management consultancies doing it to others, trying to incrementally improve organizational structures, systems, and processes, and people even. And in my experience, doing that work, all of those things that I just mentioned have really amazing elements or kernels of goodness baked in, like lean or agile or business process mapping. And all these things are really important to do. but they went right back into the same power structure, the same management hierarchy, right? So the goodness that was promised with all of these incremental improvement techniques went right back into the same system that withered that away, made that atrophy away and died. And the cycle was almost predictable, 18 months. So we get this huge change initiative, and I was part of them, and I led them, right? And we get people all excited about the promise of change, the promise of making it better around here. And we'd all go away to the offsite, we'd all do the ropes course and the trust courses, and we'd all get really comfortable with each other in hopes that that would somehow make things better. And then we all arrive back at the office after that experience, and management comes out and does what management does, and operates with implicit, oftentimes hidden rules. It's like, why are these decisions being made? Why isn't everything more transparent and visible? And then over time, as I said, all that goodness atrophies away and dies. And this led to, I think, cynicism for me in most organizational structures. This whole change management process and the promise of improvement is really one of the driving motivators for me. I had my butt handed to me countless times as an entrepreneur, trying all these clever improvement techniques and still getting the same results. And I kind of reached my limit of that in around 2005, 2006. I did a public company offering. We had all the best minds trying to make really cool things happen, and it failed. And it failed in almost predictable ways in hindsight. And at that point, I was kind of broken open enough to consider new things. And that's when I crossed paths with my to-become business partner, Brian, who was experimenting with new things, Brian Robertson, in his company. And we crossed paths in 2006 and launched HolacracyOne in 2007. And 15 years later, we have, as I said, as Dennis introduced me, what I think is a gold standard, not the only, but a gold standard replacement for management hierarchy. And I do mean that sentence in its entirety. Holacracy is a complete wholesale replacement for management hierarchy with no equivocations. It's seriously, it is a completely different way. There are no bosses, managers, supervisors, no directors, there are no teams, there are no managers leading teams. Everybody is in the game for the work in pursuit of purpose. And the whole system biases towards that. And that's what I love about the self-organizing systems. Everything hangs on purpose. And as Marco was talking about, the save the cinema is a cool purpose. That's all you need to start. Save the cinema, and let's self-organize around that. And instead of trying to make people feel better, in my view of self-organization and what an organization is, we seed that purpose into a system, and then everybody gets inspired about save the cinema. And we all play by the same set of rules to figure out what is the work needed to save the cinema and what structure owns that work. Game on. And so that's kind of self-organization, holacracy style, amongst a lot of other things.
Awesome. And of course, the work continued, as I was also able to witness with the other company Encode, in the sense of, okay, taking it one step further and also looking at the financial structures and the legal structures to get rid of that final, like, let's say, boundary of or barrier of the employee versus employer versus employee divide, like the two classes of people that are still there even in the most progressive organizations due to our legal structures. So yeah, and now leading leading into work with the whole DAO space, which is probably an interesting topic we can come back to. So that does it for the first round of general introductions, and now it's open season for anyone who wants to respond or feels inspired to speak to any of the things that we've heard from each of you. So does anyone? Yeah, Jim, please.
Hey, hi, Thomas. I'll address you. I was an entrepreneur many times, corporate executive, C-level exec in a multi-billion-dollar multinational company, public company CEO, et cetera. And I will say I tended to resist the peddlers of various management nostrums.
Amen, brother.
I read a few of the books, mostly threw them against the wall. Tom Peters, remember when Tom Peters was the man?
Of course.
Talk about cutting the heart out of an organization. I only found one rule, and I found this by having the counter example of the last company I worked for, where I didn't have any authority, which was I did exactly the opposite of what they did, which is to make radical intellectual honesty the fundamental value of the company. It's amazing how much of a solvent that is against other kinds of badness. And I would, literally shoot anybody who plays the game of politics, and I would define what that meant. You make somebody else look bad. You withhold information. You're doing your best for everybody. You steal credit from other people. Any of those things, and if you can, it's almost impossible to inject it into an existing company. Though you can get some traction by shooting people mostly, so that people realize that you're telling the truth. From a startup, though, you can do it because you can lay this out for people during the hiring process. And it's amazing what a filter that. It scares the hell out of some people, right? And then other people, I've been waiting for this forever.
Yeah.
And so I would just say that's the one quack nostrum, the rut method, that actually does work. With respect to Holacracy, I did read the Constitution for Holacracy. That was a lot of fun. I read it carefully in preparation. No, that was actually, I like that kind of stuff. Oh, I'm a strange dude, right? I read it to be in preparation for about a 90-minute, or maybe it was 2-hour conversation I had with Brian Robertson, which was quite interesting. And I have his book on Holacracy on my to-be-read list. And I said, this is interesting. This addresses the other part that Rutt's method does not address, which needs to be addressed for game B, which is how do we transition from box-based management to role-based management?
Yeah, that's huge.
That's fundamental. And one of my motivations for realizing that after I'd retired from business, so it was too late to actually try it, was reading the really amazing book called Hierarchy in the Forest by Chris Boehm, a world famous anthropologist. The book should have actually been called Anti-Hierarchy in the Forest, because its rationale is that for 100,000 years, our forager ancestors rigorously built social operating systems to defeat our genetic tendency towards hierarchy. He makes a very convincing argument that we are chimps and bonobos, let's assume 50-50, and both are kind of nasty hierarchical animals. Chimpanzees are, stereotypical sociopaths. Bonobos, while they're sometimes portrayed as the hippies of the great apes, not really true, and not as bad as chimps, but you wouldn't want to live in a bonobo.
Hippies of the great apes, that actually works for me.
Troop either. And he, demonstrates from some serious biological arguments that we got, fair bits of both, and we should expect humans to be much more hierarchical than foragers are. And he goes through a whole series of arguments on how we stop the emergence of hierarchy early. And then he talks just a little bit about how we stop doing that at larger scales. And so one of the things he points out is that in one of the parts of the social operating system is no person has general long-lasting authority. But on the other hand, as we all know, people differ substantially in their capacity, either from inherent capacity with respect to like personality type, IQ, physical stature, whatever, and their accumulated assets of experience in life. So, the best woman tuber forager, leads the troop walking through the places where tubers might be to go harvest them. The person that's the best hunter of antelope leads hunts for antelope, but the best hunter of monkeys leads hunts for monkeys. And these things are fluid and they change as new people come in, because, and contrary to popular opinion, the forager groups were actually fairly fluid. People came and left. They weren't really family-bound units at all. And so they actually invented the idea of role-based leadership. And that's of course the antithesis of what we have in corporate America, political systems, etc., where somebody is in a box, right? And even though I was as a corporate leader, spent a tremendous amount of time on people. I would spend a third of my time easily on hiring and development. We all know that the right person was never in the right box, right? And in most companies that are just stone stupid about such things, the mismatch between person and the box is nightmarishly bad, right? The box is badly construed and the fit of the person to the box is relatively minimal. And hence, why big organizations are as bad as they are. So anyway, I think one of the things that holacracy and sociocracy and other kinds of things of that family provide for is a mechanism to get towards role-based and transient and dynamic leadership based on the dynamic reality of what needs to be dealt with right now. And so that I liked about it. The downside of it, when I read the Constitution, was I say for a smaller organization, it seemed like a goddamn lot of paperwork. And my reaction was, up to 20 or 30 people, it wasn't obvious to me that the hierarchy, that the paperwork was worth the win, but it might be. Brian argued strenuously that, as you know, he likes to argue, and he argues strenuously, but with a nice smile on his face. We had a wonderful conversation. He said, "Oh, it's great for two people." And I go, "Oh." So anyway, those are my comments about what I know about sociocracy and holacracy. I think it's very promising. I think it's interesting for sure. But those are my reactions.
Yeah, well, thank you. I could jump into any one or a number of those, but I don't want to hijack where we're going. If you want me to reply or respond, I certainly can do that. A couple of things came to mind.
Let's hear your response.
Yeah, first, Jim, it's so nice to cross paths with you. I love your thinking, I love your work, and the points you're making really resonate with me. I had the privilege of working with a lot of progressive leading entrepreneurs, household name entrepreneurs. They've created some really cool things, and those of us that have been in this game for a while have an intuition about what works. They're good leaders, good managers, progressive entrepreneurs, and have intuitively encoded these principles, either formally or informally, in their style of leadership. And when you talk about making things visible, the severe rationality, everything must make sense, everything must be explainable or visible. This is one of these. This element is actually a key foundational element as I think about the power shift. What do we need to encode in the rules to adequately express game B kind of systems? And one of the fundamentals is a high degree of visibility. Everything's visible, or as much visibility as you can stomach, including the visibility and the transparency around things that might even need to be kept private or confidential. But be visible and transparent about that too, so that everybody can participate in sensing into whether or not that still works, whether or not that still serves the broader purpose. And we can dynamically adjust as we go along. And the other thing is, there's been a lot of experimentation in functional mapping. Back in old school days, there used to be a whole movement of trying to functionally map an organization instead of using boxes and job descriptions and pyramid charts. And functional mapping, quite honestly, I think is a precursor to the self-organizational structures that we're now seeing. The biomimicry, the other thing about the forest, these are naturally occurring structures that aren't fused to a human ego. In other words, they're not projections of mind, predicting and controlling what we think might be needed in some distant or near future, but they're actually responding to current reality, market conditions, constraints or abundance in the system, like a forest, like a natural system. They're evolving, expanding, contracting, morphing, trimming, and pruning itself. Nothing is permanent. There are no permanent structures. The whole thing moves, right? And there are no people that hold power. That sounds like a really weird statement, and one that might sound even naive to some, but in a system of rules where the whole structure is broken down, answering the question, what is the work and where does it live? That work lives in roles. Those roles have clear definition about its boundaries, its purpose, its domain, its accountabilities, and then people fill those roles. The role has the authority. The person technically does not. There is no personal authority over the rules themselves. You can't show up as Jim and say, because I'm Jim, I say. Doesn't fly. And I have the privilege of working with a lot of executives who are very used to that stance and get a lot of shit done that way, very effective shit done that way. And that's a big shift, right? Of surrendering personal autonomy and power to a system that expresses something you want in the world. And that's why you would surrender. You are surrendering it to express a purpose greater than yourself, save the cinema. And then that drops the ego, right? And then everybody plays by the same set of rules, which starts to get the operational efficiency in the system. Everybody's playing the same game together, and nobody at speed, this is a good case scenario, nobody's worried about the managers swooping in and pulling the rug out from under you because they decide they've had a bad day. And this is the other thing. We can rely on progressive leaders to an extent, but everybody has a bad day. And we want a system that we rely on that everybody can trust and everybody can participate in with a system of rules as opposed to an implicit holding of power by a person.
I would like to say something about what Jim said before. And I apologize if I'm getting a bit off topic. But he made us this wonderful journey about our anthropological evolution from primates to modern corporations. And I have my own theory why this has happened. I mean, I totally agree with Jim that our primate ancestors were or are extremely hierarchical societies. And then when human beings appeared as forages, we were more self-organized. There wasn't this huge formal hierarchies. And then we became, again, hierarchical, extremely hierarchical. And my explanation for that is that it's a matter of adaptation to the environment. When you are in an stable environment, like these primates were in the jungle, it's good to have a very hierarchical formal hierarchies in their society. But then there were some crazy monkeys, because the monkeys that were saying that were the ones that stayed in the trees, that wanted to go down from the trees and start exploring the savannas. And in this environment, it's a much more unstable and unpredictable environment, and it's much more risky. So you need less hierarchy. So you became more self-organized, and you created these foraging societies. And then after that came the agricultural revolutions, where we settled and we created again a stable environment. And then hierarchies appeared again. So it's what spiral dynamics says, that we are adapting to the conditions that we face. And in the moment that we are facing now, we need less hierarchy, or we don't need formal hierarchies, because we are living in a highly unstable and unpredictable environment. That's my explanation of all that.
Mm. Yeah, while I was listening to you, I was also thinking, yeah, and today we have the VUCA conditions, the volatility, absolutely, uncertainty, and what the others C and A were, ambiguity and something.
Complexity.
Thank you. Yeah, especially complexity, right? So we are the victims of our own success as a species in some level. So now we created conditions that are so chaotic, or that we are in over our heads, and now we need to be able to dynamically steer once more and adapt quick. And this is where the bottlenecks of traditional organization just, I think will become less competitive. And that's, I think, a question I have for you, Jim. So you said that a game game B parasitizes game A, I guess. So is that could you see that proto Bs outmaneuver, or how does that dynamic unfold? Because we have to in some way cooperate with the existing. We have to plug into the existing system to because that's where the lifeblood and the financial thing is going on, but we also have to compete with that system to some degree without just, I don't know, going in straight opposition to it. So how do you see that dance? How do you think that would unfold?
That's a great question. And it's actually multidimensional, as you might expect, and complex, right? Which is that if you think about what makes, think of, game B as a very little teeny social operating system trying to grow in this big mass of game A. We have to outcompete in multiple dimensions. And one of the key ones is talent, right? And the problem with game A, there's so many problems, but one of the great problems is that these generator functions ignore one thing: human well-being. What a concept, right? Why would it ignore human well-being? And so one of the fundamental design goals of game B is to build a society that's based around human well-being, and is what's especially underlined for young people about to have a family or have a family. So that's got to be a wonderful place to raise their children. When I go out in the world and I talk to people, and do this all the time, actually I've been doing it virtually the last 2 years, by far the strongest resonance to the game B signal is from people 25 to 40 who either have very young children or are looking to start their family. And they say, God almighty, I don't want to raise my children in this game A. They don't have the words for it, but this blah, 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 blah. And so if game B provides very substantial upgrade in human well-being, which we believe we can easily do. The standard is so low, we can outcompete on recruiting talent, right? And in the early days in particular, where let's say there's 100 proto Bs with 15,000 people, we'll have the pick of the chicks, right? We'll have the best people that we can possibly imagine. And interestingly, with respect to this parasitism issue, we need some game A resources, but over time we'll need less and less. And the actual game A cost of living in the game B world by design will be much lower than it is in game A itself. Because the other big design principle of game B is that we have to live at a way that's sustainable with respect to the earth. And by our rough calculations, and this has been validated, or actually we got this from other people, for Americans, that means about a 75% reduction of inputs of things and energy. For Europeans, about 2/3, 65%, something like that. Interestingly, our highly talented game B people don't need to make a whole lot of money, right? So the game A costs of putting together teams to go compete back in game A is way less expensive because they're getting paid significantly in psychic income of human well-being. So here we have low-cost labor of the highest quality. Now, does that sound like a prescription for a sustainable competitive advantage? Hell yes. And truthfully, it actually frees up some dimensions of design space around non-hierarchical management, because we actually might be able to give up a little efficiency in the design space of management because we have these other two great advantages. But I suspect that in certain kinds of work, even this kind of organizational design will be a plus as well. For instance, in creative work. I think it's so funny because one of the things we hate about game B is advertising and the pernicious reprogramming of our needs and desires through advertising. But wouldn't it be an interesting and strange play for some proto-Bs to become ad agencies, right? And just the kind of people that would be attracted to game B and would like to work in a non-hierarchical environment are likely to have high skill sets for doing game A advertising. Isn't that an interesting and strange, sell the capitalists the rope to hang themselves with kind of idea? And so, of course, being pragmatists, we will look at business categories where the combination of superior talent, lower labor costs and non-hierarchical management structure, and of course employee ownership, combine to provide a sustainable competitive advantage in that category. And of course, over time, as Game B gets bigger, there'll be more such categories that we can address, but we'll be smart and attack those where we can. Are we going to start a nail factory first? Probably not, right? Those are highly optimized, grinding kinds of businesses. So we will select businesses where the structural competitive advantage of Game B versus Game A will actually pay off in the ability to outcompete in the category.
Excellent. I have a question to Tom actually, and I was wondering, do you think, Tom, what role might the emergence of Web3 and decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, play to create better incentive structures and solve global coordination problems? Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think a lot of what drives Game A is the incentives, the financial capital incentives, as we heard. They're all geared towards a certain thing. And with tokens and tokenization, there's a lot more things we can play around with, and it's more programmable. So what's your hunch there of the development?
Yeah, I mean, that's yet the next level of emergence there. I don't even know what Web3 necessarily means. I have an intuition, maybe a little bit. It just means next, right? A little bit of feeling of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. But I will claim that the more mature self-organizing operating systems on offer have been DAOs, really, for quite some time, just not on chain. And so the next evolution is to formalize and systematize further these rule sets that we are trusting to coordinate our effort to get purposeful work done. So the Constitution that Jim points out, yeah, it's a hefty document. So the rule sets are no fun to read, but can be a lot of fun to play. And you just pick any sport that your favorite sport, whether it be American football, European soccer, or whatever, tennis, there's a rule book, you don't read the rule book to enjoy the sport, you play. And the gameplay can be transmitted without ever reading the rules, actually. There's a transmission quality. And so, especially if the system supports your gameplay. So I think we're seeing, we want gamification of this, which is part of the incentive, to make it fun to play the game of work in pursuit of purpose. So there are two things. It's fun to express meaningful, useful purposes into the world. That's the shift. And we don't have to worry about somebody, as I said, swooping in and having a bad day. We're all playing the same game together. And so we're getting glimpses of this in the self-organizing operating systems like Sociocracy, Holacracy, Teal, Responsive, all the others that are playing. Now we encode those in rule sets that live on the blockchain. We also encode the other elements, the capital structures, because people want to get paid. They want meaningful work, work that makes them feel like they're contributing to something of value. That's a huge incentive. I'm totally aligned with Jim's thinking on that. Incentive alone allows us to compete better for talent, because you get a direct experience of seeing your contribution make an impact, right? And then you get rewarded for that in near real time. So blockchain and tokenomics allow for reward systems, incentive systems to be completely rethought. Salaries gone, monthly paychecks gone, right? This is nonsense stuff in a self-organized, fully decentralized world. You're contributing your time, energy, and talent to a purpose you care about via a smart contract that remunerates you in the appropriate way while you're playing a game. That's what we're seeing in the future. And it becomes just a sea of purposes that are seeded into decentralized autonomous organizations that are attracting, that's the strange attractor, attracting people and talent to it. And then the blockchain and the smart contracts enforce the rules and provide the incentives. And so while right now, these things that we call DAOs are woefully immature, in my opinion, but hold all the promise to change the game yet again. So my attention is, how do we mature these things up? How do we introduce DAOs, as they're currently construed, to what I would call 21st century governance, the experiments and the thought work that's gone on in Game B and self-organization and sociocracy and holacracy, and merge these worlds together to give us a much better system that's fun to play and incentivizes the energy that we need to get the work done in the world that we need.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just I'll try to be brief, not my natural forte, but with respect to Web3, this actually goes back to thinking about automation in general, is think about what you want first before falling in love with a tool set. When I look at Web3, and I've looked at a lot of Web3, in fact, I've helped design one of the successful coins and advised another. And I think that building DAOs today on top of radically trustless architectures like Ethereum is letting the tools getting in the way of the work. And just how back in the 80s, we'd say, document your system on paper first before you automate it. Figure out what you want to accomplish from governance, design the governance rules, environments, boundary conditions, incentives, etc., and then go look for a tool rather than say, all right, within Ethereum, I can do this and DeFi that. And so start with function and look to the tooling later. To my mind, I see this stuff all the time, people throwing business plans over the transom. And I'll say, now, why did you staple Ethereum to this? It's not necessary, right? There's lots of other less expensive, more straightforward ways to do it if you can back off from radical trustlessness. And in reality, most of the world's got to have some trust in it anyway. So why bring in all the costs and slowness and awkwardness of the radical trustless Satoshi style blockchain? So.
I wanted to say something as well about DAOs and Web3. And probably I'm the less qualified voice in the room about that because I'm not an expert at all. But I was all excited hearing Tom about what he was proposing for future developments of DAOs. And obviously, I see a huge potential with DAOs and the Web3, but its use will depend vastly on the level of consciousness of its users. It's the same as the internet that came loaded with promises of decentralization and democratization, and at the end of the day, it has ended up mostly as a highly centralized instrument of control of the power elites. So the Web3 and the DAOs at the moment are largely being used at the moment as to foster efficiency and to increase the power of those who have more tokens, basically. So it's gonna greatly depend on who's leading those developments. And it will have people like Thomison leading those developments. I have high hopes, but if we have others, I don't know. And so far, what I see is a lot of orange and not many second-tier consciousness in all this crypto world, you know.
Yeah, right. It's just a tool, and if everything, if your tool is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, right? So and Web3 is not different, and I like the parallel you draw to Web2 or the web in general, like where we all had this, oh, it's gonna be the planet's gonna wake into its nervous, the internet's its nervous system, and we're all gonna wake up and hold hands and sing Kumbaya or whatever. But not quite.
Not quite, yeah.
So and which maybe leads us to the topic that that is current in our minds, which is so it's not all kumbaya, especially globally, as we know. So we wanted to have a brief look at the situation in Ukraine, and maybe we can think about like what structures are in play, like also management and organizational structures or political power structures, and what would kind of from the new organizational or Game B world what would help or would have gone differently? Maybe, I don't know, if some of that wisdom was applied, like because it seems like we have a single point of failure in Vladimir Putin at the top of the power hierarchy, calling all the shots, and that is yeah, that's tragic. Yeah, any thoughts on that from any one of you?
Oh, I can jump in. What the hell?
Well, the interesting question would be, I think there was the comment that, that conflict is, could be a turning point in terms of how we look at, the movement, the transition between game A and game B. Is it a regress to game A, or is there embedded, encoded, let's say, a way of moving to game B as nations? So that would be the interesting question for me, at least.
Yeah, look, that's actually great.
Absolutely. I would like to say only that that's a very good point, because that could be a catalyst for changing consciousness about how we look at things. I mean, we need a game B because there's no planet B. That's the basic reason in a nutshell. So we are in the middle of a health crisis. We are on the verge of ecological disaster, and now we have even nuclear threat. That it was something I thought we have come over with. That we have it was not a threat anymore. So we are going back to the 70s and the 80s, to the Cold War. So do we need any more reasons to change our ways? That's my question.
You wanted to chime in, Jim?
Yeah, I liked your pivot there. I think that's actually quite interesting. Something I've been thinking about. I've done a series of 4 podcasts now on Ukraine with various experts, and I'm doing at least 2 more next week. So this is something I've got my head into fairly a bit about, and I like to think about it from, as always, the systems perspective. One of the interesting things that's come out about the Ukraine situation is that we may be using game B methods with game A systems in the West's response to Putin. In particular, if we go back and look at history, modernism seemed great until August 1914. Probably, right? You go back and read the writings in the early 20th century, it's all optimism all the way, right? So, oh yeah, the economies are so interconnected, we can never have any more wars, everything's getting better every year, etc. Well, guess what? 1914 opened everybody's eyes. And since 1914, there's been a deep libido in humans to avoid that disaster happening again. And so we attempted to build collective security as the answer. The first League of Nations, right, was going to, World War I was going to be the war that ended all wars. Well, guess what? They were wrong. World War II came along, even more horrible. Then the United Nations was put in place to prevent war from happening again. And probably it wouldn't have done much. However, we did stumble into mutual assured destruction as the solution to the renewal of war amongst the big powers. At least, still lots of border wars, civil wars turned ugly. Vietnam, things of that sort. But no major clashes between the major powers. And that indeed is, of course, Putin's biggest violation. He's broken the taboo against cross-border invasions to seize territory on land, and has done so as a nuclear power, making it even worse. But as it's turned out, maybe network warfare, economic warfare, cutting them off the internet, etc., may turn out to be a sufficiently low cost and sufficiently unrisky form of collective security. And it has the nice built-in game B-ness to it that it requires cooperation of many players to be effective. For instance, if just the United States were bringing sanctions against Putin, wouldn't work at all. There'd be plenty of ways for the Russians to get out of it. But the fact that most of the countries on earth are participating in this, and that even the companies that aren't required by law to do so are nonetheless coming to the table based on public demand more than anything else, I'm sure, not their tender-hearted tendencies. It's actually quite amazing, in that this self-regulating, self-assembling network response to aggression might actually work. Now, whether it will act fast enough to bring Putin to the negotiating table is a question that's still open. But even if it doesn't, but it destroys Russia thereafter, or cripples Russia very severely, it's an object lesson to anybody else who wants to try that same game. Are you listening to us, China? Right?
So what are you saying? Are you saying that the nature of war changed due to the fact that we have internet now, and that everything is connected, and that we can apply these pressure points because of the interconnectedness of all things?
Yeah, exactly. That maybe we finally reached that point we thought we were in 1914, where war was impossible. Literally, you could read people that say war is impossible because we're so interconnected. Maybe we actually now are so interconnected that if and only if there's a consensus, i.e. most of the countries of the world agree, which is a good way to keep one hegemon from abusing their power. U.S. has abused its power, let's be honest, right? In the past, Iraq, that was very bad. Not quite as bad as what Putin's doing, but close. So the beauty of this is that if we are indeed in this highly, highly networked world where a consensus of people acting together can so severely punish an aggressor without having to go to war, we are in a new place.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to jump in one time more, because what was interesting with the Corona pandemic was that it was a global coordination of some practices. Everybody had to wear masks. Everybody had to, confine themselves at home. And now you see this global, coordination in response to the attack of Putin, which is only possible through the internet, And so I wonder how much of that, like how much game B is already embedded in that global coordination.
Mm-hmm. And that ties as well with how these new vanguard organizations are basically getting things done, but it's by basically peer pressure. Mechanisms of peer pressure is with the traditional hierarchies. Things got done by somebody on top telling you what to do and imposing rules upon you. In this case, we have a decentralized mechanism where peer pressure, if you don't follow the rule set, for example, of holacracy, is going to be self-corrected by peer pressure, by the people in the circle that are telling you are not doing your job right. So you don't need a hierarchy somebody telling you what to do or bailing for that the rules are being respected. It can be a decentralized mechanism, as this is the case.
Even the resistance, just in terms, I don't know much about the military situation, but what I can gather is there's a centralized kind of army on the one side, and the other side there's people with they're lit up with purpose. They're decentralized, and they just self-organize spontaneously and see what can we do, there's a lot of sensing and responding going on, enhanced by the technical means we have, and the defense with these is also interesting. The balance tipping there, we have these Stinger missiles and these other defense systems that are really hard to, you have a tank, you're a target. You drive there, somebody comes with this thing, and so now the whole world supplying these kinds of weapons to the Ukrainians will make it really fucking hard for the Russians to, to take the whole country. I don't think it's going to happen that they're going to take over the whole country. It's too vast and so on, and it's distributed, it's decentralized. How do you squash that resistance? It's going to be really hard and expensive, and I think that's a good news. although it's going to be a lot of tragedy until then, until this resolves, in my opinion. Yeah.
Certainly the facts on the ground of technology always matter. And, you know, just like in World War I, again, people didn't expect static lines for 3 years. They ground each other to dust. But the invention of the machine gun and the rapid fire, small size field artillery had switched the balance from the power of the offense to the power of defense. And, you know, the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, the Prussians just zapped right in, right? Blew right into France. And then in 1940, they did it again. But during that intermediate period, the balance of technologies was such that the defense had a big advantage of the offense. We may actually be in that, and this may be sustainable in that the assets, the big military assets, planes, tanks, ships, getting ever more expensive. I mean, ridiculous. Some of the American planes are a couple $100 million each. Missiles, inexpensive and getting way better, because most of their getting better is in silicon. The Javelin is an amazing device. It's what they call a fire and forget weapon. You just aim it at the tank, you acquire it, you pull the trigger, and then you go hide, right? It takes a couple seconds for it to get there, but you can go hide before it gets there. You don't have to guide it to the target like earlier generations. And so the Javelins, Stingers, and things that will come later and that are even better may actually help a Game B world come into existence. Because, for instance, hey, imagine a proto B that's got 10 Stingers and a couple of machine guns, right? That's going to take a pretty big bunch to come and mess with them. And it may well be that a frictional defense everywhere will make aggression really, really hard. And in addition to this ability for a consensus of financial network players to come together and punish an aggressor. So maybe these are things that are part of the gradient that allows us to get to Game B.
On that hopeful note, I think, or is there any more you want to add to the discussion, Marco, or you seem to be wanting to say something? Or anyone else?
Fine.
No. Yeah. So I think it's time for it was a really fruitful conversation. I think it's time to wrap it up and maybe close with a final statement. Each one of us, just you know, a few sentences on what your takeaways are, or where, and yeah, just to round out the conversation. So who would start us off?
Well, what I would like to say is that obviously, I think, as I said before, I think we have to change our ways, because we are in a turning point where maybe we can go in the direction of utopia, but I think we are heading in the direction of disaster. So we are in this intersection where we have to make a decision. Following Game A, it will lead us into disaster. Going into Game B, at least, is a more hopeful perspective. And we've been talking a lot about self-organization and all these radical alternatives to the traditional management model. And I would like to say that I would like to change the perspective about how we deal with that, because most of the people think this self-organization thing is something alien to most of the organization, is something only limited to a number of, shall we call it, enlightened organizations, or other, we'll call it like crazy organizations, depending on your perspective about that. And I think that's not the case. I mean, for me, self-organization is the default practice of any dynamic system. And even in traditional organizations, self-organization is the rule, not the exception. So everything in an organization that managers don't or can control is self-organized, from an spontaneous business lunch meeting to an office romance, you know. So everything, most of the things in an organization self-organizes. So we are used to self-organize. Otherwise, it would be impossible to work always waiting for a boss telling us what to do, asking permission for every single decision we do. So I would like to end that with this note that probably demystifies a bit this topic of self-organization. For me, self-organization is the norm, and command and control is the special case.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Marco, it's good to see you again. Tom, nice to meet you. Jim, cool to cross paths with you finally. And thanks, Dennis, for inviting me. It's been a lively discussion, informative for me. I love this topic. I'm passionate about how it changes us as individuals, how we manage ourselves by these same principles, deepening our awareness of our ability to respond to any given situation, like a pandemic or a war, an unwanted war, and then how that moves into our organizational systems, how we as individuals come together to coordinate our effort, and then eventually into self-governing systems, governance itself, that just obsoletes the notion of government that can be corrupted by a single individual. That just must die. And while I didn't comment directly on the question of Ukraine, that's how it lands for me. We're seeing that which must die. And it's now more brutally apparent in all of its full color of why it must die. And the response is different this time, to Jim's point. Same with the pandemic, huge suffering for humanity, but it pointed to a different way of responding. And in the work environment, it changed the notion of how we work and where we work. It became possible to not work in a central office. And so I think we're just on the edge of some changes that a lot of us have been working in and for a very long time, but they're beginning to spread and catch fire. And I am really hopeful about that. So it was really cool to hang out with you all. Thanks.
Awesome. And Jim?
Yeah, I was kind of echoing Thomas that we've been thinking about this, been working on this, applying bits and pieces of it in various places where it seemed appropriate and safe to do so. But man, does it feel like the time is right to really start ramping up this transition. The pioneering work in things like Holacracy provided a lot of learning and experience. Some of the theory that comes from Game B and from complex systems thinking, the existence of DAOs and the exploration of design space has been phenomenal. The pandemic, Ukraine, the network response. Wow, it feels like in complexity talk, we talk about the basins of attraction. Or strange attractors, to coin a phrase or steal one. And typically, the way I describe strange attractors is imagine our civilization as a metal salad bowl, and the current state of the world is a marble rolling around inside the salad bowl. Now, usually the marble stays in the salad bowl, but every once in a while, a big shake occurs. Somebody sneezes, who's holding the salad bowl, and the marble flies out of the bowl and lands in another salad bowl. That's the transition state, and you can't go back. Once you're out, the probability of coming back to the old bowl is almost zippo. So it's what they call hysteresis, where a change is irreversible. And so it sure feels to me like the marble's way up the side in terms of our capacity, external events, and of course, more and more people every day see that wall of environmental degradation rushing at us. Faster and faster. So man, if this ain't the time, it's going to be too late before much longer. So time to get to work, people.
Yeah, it seems like as a true end of history moment, either the actual end of history or the Fukuyama idea that we are reaching a stable state through Game B that would be an adapted form. So like this point where we really have to do something. I wonder why. I wonder sometimes what we can actually do with, the whole liminal web, the whole metamodern, Game B, integral spiral dynamic scene, or if we are just commentators on what's happening on the global scale, or what our actual circle of influence is. But I think that's that we have to find that out, every one of us. And so, Dennis, do you want to close it?
Yes. So Wiseman once said the best way to predict the future is to create it. I think that's what we all came here to together to do. And so I see it hopeful also, and I choose to see it hopeful, because it's a choice too, and it's not just, yeah, it's either this, you know, I'm not a doomer in that sense. I want to look to the seeds of the new, and it's the time between worlds, as Zach Stein calls it. I really like this term. Feels like a time between worlds, or between salad bowls, or however you want to see that. And something new is coming. This is what we're trying to document. This is what we're trying to get the word out. And so we're actually doing things right now. That the five of us are doing things, which is to get the word out and create a, you know, nourish that attractor, make it visible. You know, look at the contours of that. What is that new thing emerging? And we may fuck up, and we will. But that's okay, as long as we just, you know, do our best on the way to that new reality to bring into being. So thank you all for coming, and it was fabulous conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I'd love to see you in this or that other context again, and I will, I'm sure. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.